Democrats have introduced a constitutional amendment on Thursday to overturn Citizens United. So now, let me give you some details on this. Basically, Citizens United prohibited the government from restricting political campaign spending by corporations, nonprofits, and unions. Now, this amendment, if passed, would allow Congress and state governments to enact what they call reasonable viewpoint neutral limitations on campaign funding, including restricting corporations from spending unlimited amounts of money to influence elections. Now, this sounds great. Wonderful. But there's a few problems. Not with the legislation itself that I could see, but in the fact that it's not going to go anywhere. So now, Representative Adam Schiff had introduced this amendment, and he said in a press release that it would close legal loopholes that corporations and other wealthy groups have exploited for far too long. Schiff has introduced an amendment to overturn Citizens United every year since 2013. And again, we've seen that it's, well, never went anywhere. So now, in a quote, he said, Citizens United was one of the most egregious enablers of special interest money, but it was only in the latest in the long line of Supreme Court cases that opened the floodgates. To truly rein in dark money, we must amend our Constitution. Now, look, he's right about that. I think that is the only way. But at the same time, Republicans control the House. And yes, Democrats have the Senate. But remember, probably about 80% of our politicians take corporate money. So, again, I would be very, well, let's just say this. The chance of something like this getting through any Congress at this point is impossible. It's never going to happen. Not through this. Now, there are ways that you can get around Congress. The corruption. But this is not one of them. And so it feels like a stunt. Even though, again, on the facts, he is correct. And look, let me give you some, details in case you're not familiar with some of the court cases that have led up to this. Back in 1976, the Supreme Court had ruled in Buckley Vallejo that independent expenditures didn't pose a risk of political corruption. Which, I mean, come on. That's ridiculous, right? No, it's absolutely ridiculous. Of course it's corruption. There was not only a risk of political corruption, there was the guarantee of political corruption. Of course independent expenditures are corruption. Now, following that decision, there was the First National Bank of Boston versus Bellotti. Now, look, if Buckley Vallejo had opened the gates, then Bellotti allowed corporations to walk right through it. The court had stated in Bellotti that there was no support, quote, for the proposition that speech that otherwise would be within the protection of the First Amendment loses that protection simply because its source is a corporation. Now, that is absolutely absurd. Yeah, of course there's support for that proposition. Corporations are not human beings. Corporations are fictional legal entities that, by the way, are there to shield executives and human beings, the human beings that are running the corporation, the board members, executives, etc., CEO, from legal liability in case the corporation does something wrong. Not a human being. There is that quote here. I think it was Robert Reich who said, I believe a corporation is a person when Texas executes one. They're not people. They're not human beings. They're legal fictions. Why are they getting speech rights? The same kinds of speech rights. Now, yes, people work there. But you know what's funny is that the corporations that are allowed these speech rights and therefore give independent expenditures to PACs, super PACs, etc., campaign contributions, Well, those don't really represent the workers that are working there. So think about it this way. You're working at McDonald's, okay? McDonald's decides the corporation is going to give to Republicans. How's that representing you? Remember, your labor is making McDonald's money. Again, that's the whole point of you working for them. You make them money, and then they give you a tiny little bit of it in return. But they take that money that you generated with your labor, and then they go and bribe a politician, give it to a Republican, who is then going to vote against your own best interests by making sure they never raise the minimum wage. That's what this sick system, this corrupt system, allows to happen. Not just allows, it was designed this way. Yet both of these cases had underpinned the other incredibly pro-corporate cases that made Citizens United possible. And so, again, if you would want to get rid of the corruptive, and I do, by the way, influence of money in politics, you would have to go after those as well. Again, the only reason Citizens United was even able to stand is because of those other cases that were decided before it. That makes me believe that this is performative. That this amendment was introduced by Representatives Dean Phillips, Pramila Jayapal, and Jim McGovern. Okay, great, but it's not going to do anything. It's not going to pass. That's the problem. It's performative. Why not do that when you would actually have enough people in the House and the Senate? They didn't do that. They didn't pass that. Why? Again, 80% of Congress takes donations from corporations. When you have that system, do you ever expect anyone, the people who are receiving these donations, to ever vote to stop them? No, never. That's why we cannot trust Congress. Why you have to go around Congress and actually go for a constitutional amendment. Don't rely on these people. We're going to continue to put up the same dog and pony show, kabuki theater, and say, "Oh, look at that! We introduced this amendment that's not going to go anywhere. We're fighting for you, while we're also taking corporate money." No, don't believe them. Get involved on your own. There are groups out there that are fighting to actually get a constitutional amendment. Join them. And don't wait for Adam Schiff, Pramila Jayapal, or any of these people, politicians, to come save you. You have to do it yourself. You have to work to get these state legislatures, call for a constitutional convention to add this amendment. It's the only way it's going to work. Otherwise, it's just going to continue to be more of the same, more of the corruption.